ladies and gentlemen, the truth on the tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. Tonight we're going to talk about a number of issues, particularly the Syrian elections. We're going to talk a little bit about Ukraine, and we're going to get into a whole number of things. I suppose we should talk about the shooters briefly. A Ground Zero 9/11 Commission is planning street action in New York City on September 11th of this year. And of course, I want to continue the discussion of Ben Sasse, who is the U.S. Senate candidate in Nebraska, who is the Republican candidate, and who poses probably a bigger threat than what my guest Dan Berdorf mentioned last week. So we need to look at that as well. But before we do, I'd like to encourage you to go to ucy.tv. If you're not listening on the website now, you can catch this show, Truth on the Tracks, here on ucy.tv every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can go to the show's personal webpage, which is ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks, and that's the page you're going to find the archive versions of this show, internet chat room, if you want to join in on that, as well as the RSS feed of my latest articles as they're posted to BrandonTurbeville.com. Now, I am also a regular writer for ActivistPost.com and the Anti-Media. But if you're interested in my work specifically, then I'd encourage you to go to BrandonTurbeville.com, and that's the website where I repost all of my articles, all of my interviews, all of the YouTube videos, and archive versions of this show as well. You can also find my 6 books on the Books tab on BrandonTurbeville.com. Just click on Books. That'll take you to the bookstore, so you can order the books from there. It's pretty easy, and I'd encourage you to do that. So I should begin here by saying we're going to talk about the Syrian elections to begin with, but the show is being recorded on June the 6th of 2014, so almost a week ahead of time, and it's also being recorded with me under the weather yet again. So I've had to record the show twice now this year, being a bit under the weather, and this time I don't quite know what it is, but who's to say what it is? We're being bombarded with all types of chemicals and damaging substances that could do harm to the immune system and cause a variety of diseases. We're getting sprayed like bugs every day with the chemtrails. The chemtrails have been pretty bad here in South Carolina lately, not as bad as I've seen them, granted, but they've been bad nonetheless. And of course the genetically modified foods, which wreak havoc on your gut, your gut flora, and cause a variety of cancers and other health issues as well. So who's to know what causes illnesses anymore, aside from the toxic vaccinations and so forth, which thankfully I don't take anymore. So on to Syria. We need to offer congratulations to Bashar al-Assad on his victory in the Syrian elections. That was quite the positive display that we saw in Syria around election time. We saw people come out in droves for their first opportunity to choose their leader through democratic means. And this was over the last couple of weeks. We had voting that took place in Syria, not in the death squad controlled areas, of course, but we had voting that took place in Syria, and also at the consulates and embassies, Syrian embassies and consulates all across the world, except, of course, in Europe, where the Europeans refused to participate and refused to allow the Syrian people to have a voice. If you were a Syrian citizen, you were able to go to the consulate, cast your vote at the consulate or the embassy, and not have to go back to Syria. But of course the Europeans, the Anglo-Americans, the Anglo-Europeans stepped in to stop that immediately, because they love democracy so much, don't they? But anyway, didn't stop democracy, because Assad was reelected with 88.7% of the vote. Now, that might seem strange to some. This may seem fishy to some, but the fact is Assad was widely popular before the Syrian destabilization. He had a popularity rating in somewhere of the area of 70% after the destabilization began 3 years ago and even on now. Assad's popularity increased even more so because of his staunch resistance to the death squads, the killing of the death squad members who take power and immediately begin and the religious fundamentalist beheadings and torture and rapes and all other kinds of mayhem and disgusting acts. Assad is wiping them up, and he's always been pretty successful against them. But he's also outwitted the West, and he was seen as a reformer again before the destabilization took place. So this is something that should not be forgotten. He only had 2 candidates. There were 3 candidates. Contrasted that with the United States, which generally only has 2 candidates in general, corporate party A versus corporate party B, or government party, whatever you want to call it. There were 3 candidates in Syria, and one was Maher al-Hajjad, and the other was Hassan al-Nuri. Now, keep in mind that despite the destabilization, that despite the crisis that Syria faced, Hajjad and Nuri mainly focused their campaigns on issues like corruption, economic policy, and so forth. And this really put them out of touch with what the average Syrian is facing. Now, before anybody starts to think that they were puppet candidates, I would suggest that it's kind of hard to criticize Assad on the handling of the Syrian crisis, because he's handled it expertly. I don't think anybody else could have done that job the way that he's done it. So it's kind of hard to criticize Assad on one of his biggest successes. So instead they criticize him on corruption and economics. And maybe some of these criticisms are fair, maybe not. Doesn't matter. They were out of touch with what the average Syrian was facing, and thus Assad sailed into victory. Now, I've got an article up on my website. It was up at Activist Post as well. You check it out at BrandonTurbeville.com if you can. It's Syrian Voters Speak for Themselves Photos, and you can see photos from the elections in Syria, and you can see the democratic nature of this. We have, again, Assad 88.7% of the vote. We had, if anybody's interested, al-Nuri won 4.3% of the vote. Hajjar took 3.2% of the vote. And they had a 73.42% turnout. And, of course, that sent Skull and Bones John Kerry into just, apoplectic, contortions of anger and fear, because this was yet another turning point in favor of Syria against the death squads and so forth. So Kerry comes out and has a statement where he says, "Nothing has changed from the day before the election and the day after. Nothing. The conflict is the same. The terror is the same. The killing is the same." Well, of course, Kerry would know that that's the case because he is responsible for all of that. If Kerry wanted those things to end, then he would stop funding it and stop supporting it and stop directing it, stop organizing it. Of course, he's not going to do that. Kerry also said that you can't have an election in Syria because it's not fair, because you can't have an election where millions of your people don't even have the ability to vote. But notice that Kerry does not criticize the Ukrainian elections when Poroshenko won after half of the country couldn't vote. Remember, the eastern part of the country couldn't vote. But Kerry didn't have a problem with that, did he? Notice that Kerry doesn't criticize Saudi Arabia, another close ally of the United States that doesn't even have elections. He didn't criticize them at all. He didn't criticize Israel, of course, the 51st state of the United States. Couldn't criticize them, even when over half of the population of Israel can't vote. Even non-Israeli Jews can't vote there. But he didn't criticize that. Only in Syria is this a problem. Only in Syria. So, that is the situation as it's developing in Syria. And of course, again, reminding you that this show is recorded on June the 11th, so there's always the possibility for um, further developments between the time that you hear this show and the time that it's recorded, and vice versa. So, also need to point out, uh, written an article recently that you can check up on my website. But Mimi al-Laham, also known as Syrian Girl, it's now being openly admitted that in Australia, that's where she's at, she's being monitored by the Australian security agencies for extremism and extremist rhetoric. The Australian security agencies have said that they've been monitoring her for about 18 months now because of her anti-U.S. and anti-Israel comments, and they're worried that this could turn into the encouraging of violence and so forth, which of course she's never done that. In fact, she's spoken out against terrorism, you see. And this is the Orwellian doublethink. She's spoken out against terrorism, so she's an extremist. She's not anti-U.S. either. If you watched her videos or read her articles or her posts or so forth, you know that she's not anti-America. She's just anti-imperialism, and she's anti-having her home country destroyed as a geopolitical agenda. Not anti-American at all. And the term anti-Israel, of course, is always thrown around with the implication that you're anti-Semitic, as if you somehow hate Jews if you don't like Israel. And of course, she's spoken out on numerous occasions on her own post and on her own videos against anti-Semitism. So, still being watched though, because this is the Orwellian nightmare, right? If you don't support terrorism, you might be a terrorist. Unless you support terrorism in the cases where we don't want you to support terrorism, and then you also might be a terrorist. So there's no way to get around this. You have to be able to constantly update your thoughts and update your basically historical understanding to the new memes that they give you, the new propaganda that they give you. You have to be able to be afraid of terrorism and give up your rights, and then at the same time support terrorism in Syria, and then be afraid of terrorism when it comes home, and then support terrorism in Libya, and then be afraid of terrorism again, and so forth. You have to be able to do this without even thinking. And that of course is the whole meaning behind the statement in 1984, where Winston is being tortured, and when he's asked what is 2 plus 2, first Winston doesn't want to give in. He wants to say 2 plus 2 equals 4. But he's told that 2 plus 2 equals 5. And at the end, even when he says 2 plus 2 equals 5, it's not enough, because he's told that it's not enough until you actually believe that 2 plus 2 equals 5. It's not enough to make somebody repeat the talking points that you have for them, or that repeat the propaganda, or just say it, go along to get along. You have to have them absolutely believe it, because if they don't believe it, there's always the chance for resistance. And that's the situation that we're in now. That's why we are the most highly propagandized nation on the face of the earth. Because if we don't actually believe the propaganda, there's always the chance to break out of it. It has to be internalized. That's why they continue to do it. All right, now we need to talk about, first I need to get a plug out for the Ground Zero 9/11 Coalition. I'm sorry, the Freudian slip there. We have a situation in America where about 13 years after September 11th, 2001, we have the danger of becoming like the JFK conspiracy, right? A so-called conspiracy theory that old people talk about, a few old people talk about, because most of them are products of their own generation, and they can't do anything but repeat their own propaganda and talking points. But JFK, old people's conspiracy theory. 9/11 eventually on its way to being an old people's conspiracy theory, unless people start to get off the couch, stop watching so much television, and continue to speak out. 9/11 Truth, of course, was murdered when Obama took office in 2008, because 9/11 Truth was made up of a lot of left-wingers and a lot of liberals and so forth. They were opening up to questioning 9/11 until when when Obama's candidacy came up. He was perfect. He was black. He was liberal, allegedly, and he was the opposite of Bush. Well, now you've got the same thing as Bush, and 9/11 Truth, of course, has withered on the vine because they have sacrificed 9/11 Truth on the altar of the black president. Political correctness and fear of being called a conspiracy theorist, as if that's the worst thing in the world. Well, we've got to keep this from happening. We've let 9/11 Truth wither too long, and it's time to fight back on that. So, a number of activists and organizations, journalists, alternative media outlets, and so forth are in the process of trying to make 2014 the year that 9/11 Truth does reassert itself, and that is the Ground Zero 9/11 Commission. You can find them at ground0911.com, and here's what it says. This is part of their press release here. It says, this movement was started by the victims' family members who had questions. Their loved ones were murdered, and they've never been given answers. It's time to demand those answers, to unite together to demand justice. So, if you go to ground0911.com, you'll find that they have a request for volunteers, that they are requesting donations, and more important than anything else, they're requesting participation and involvement. So you'll find a tab that helps you with lodging, with travel, with directions, how to get around the city, where you can stay, that sort of thing. And you'll also find other tools there for spreading that information, the actual information about 9/11, to people who still might be on the fence regarding their own opinion. And it's still important to get those documentaries and those reports and so forth out to other people. Again, we can't let 9/11 become just another piece of history, another forgotten piece of history where we are constantly bombarded with the tired official story, the implausible official story. We cannot let another generation grow up believing that this was 19 Arab hijackers who brought 3 buildings down in New York and crashed into the Pentagon. This is a lie, and we cannot allow it to continue to be pervade all across the country. So visit ground0911.com and do whatever you can to help them make this thing a reality. You need to get out there and get some more ground action. As far as I know, there's going to be a day or two of street action, and then there's going to be a third day of speakers and so forth. So best of luck to these guys, and I'd encourage you to go check them out and support them however you can. So we've also got to talk, I guess we should talk briefly, since we're on the subject of conspiracies, we should talk briefly about the shooters that we've seen recently. We've had the shooter in Canada, we've had the shooter, the Las Vegas shooters, we've had the Oregon school shooting, lots of shootings taking place. And it's funny, I don't remember this being the case. Of course, we know for a fact that the number of actual lone shooters, or I guess we should say mass shooting incidents, of course these incidents did exist many years ago, but they were extremely rare. So one would ask several questions here. One would ask why, if these incidents were extremely low many years ago, why all of a sudden would they accelerate in recent memory? What's changed in society? It's not the access to guns, because guns are much harder to get than they ever were. Much easier to get a gun in the 70s, much easier to get a gun in the 40s, Why didn't we have these types of incidents on a regular basis? Something's changed in recent years to make this happen more and more. And even more so, what's increased these incidents so much in even the last 1 or 2 years? Now, there's a number of factors that could be taken into account here. Of course, these, you know, antipsychotic medication and so forth, the media hype, of course, the violent propaganda and so forth, the general decay of society and civilization in general, of course. But I think it goes somewhat deeper than that, because these types of shootings are just too opportunistic for the gun grabbers, basically. And I think possibly, I want to encourage you to read this article by Eric Blair over at Activist Post. It's called "Foiled FBI Terror Plots Curiously Quiet During Surge of Mass Shootings." And what he points out is that we've had well over 100 fake terror plots where the FBI manufactured a terror plot and then busted it to get the credit for it. We've had numerous instances of this. We haven't been having them recently. Instead, they've been going live. This is what's happening. These shooters are entirely created, orchestrated, encouraged, and then promoted in the media from the word go. And it does take time to create this type of scenario. It does take some time. It's not something you do overnight. Now, I realize that there's been a massive number of hit pieces on people like Alex Jones and the InfoWars crew, but also a number of other researchers and so forth who pointed out that these shootings are just too coincidental. We also have the evidence itself. The shooter in Canada, of course, remember his Facebook page was being updated while the shooting was going on. That's awfully interesting, isn't it? Unless he was playing on Facebook in between the shots, that seems highly implausible. It's like someone else was in control of that. We've got the Las Vegas shooters, just conveniently huge fans of Alex Jones, just conveniently big InfoWars people, conveniently big Second Amendment supporters and so forth. How convenient this is. And look, they're all out killing cops. You know, that's convenient, because the cops are already pissing on themselves every time they see somebody with a firearm, because they're convinced that they're in a war zone. In fact, we have an Indiana sheriff that actually said the United States is a war zone. Of course, I would tell all police that if you're so damn scared that you're going to get shot, if you're so scared of everything that moves, then please get yourself a job that fits your level of bravery better. You know, please go work in a cubicle or something, because you're obviously too cowardly to serve in a position where you may actually have to face some real danger, where you have to protect other people. But that's another subject. Let's get back to the shooters. We got to focus on that for a minute. Especially these Vegas shooters. This I'm sorry, is an attempt. At the very least, it's a very cynical attempt to not let a crisis go to waste. But I'm sorry, I don't believe for a second that these shooters are legitimate. Now, this doesn't mean I'm not saying that they didn't happen. Of course they happened. But what I'm saying is that these are indeed false flag type shootings. It's entirely plausible to believe that two people would be fed up with their economic situation, that people would be fed up with this disgusting, oppressive society that we have, and that they would be disgusted with the police enough to go out and shoot them. That's entirely believable. In case you haven't been paying attention, police have killed more American citizens than insurgents in Iraq. So while I'm not condoning what they did, of course, I'm not also going to get on the air and weep crocodile tears either, because if you want to be seen as a victim, then you should try to kill far fewer than 5,000 Americans in the last 10 years, police. So you'll excuse me if I don't bow down with all the sympathy in the world for this. But regardless, this is a concentrated attack on the Second Amendment. We have Obama now coming out and saying that he embraces this Australian-style gun policy, which is one of the most extreme in the civilized world. I would not use Australia or England as a positive example of anything ever. Just take a look at those countries. If you want to use them as a positive example of something, please, I don't know what. Maybe they have some type of food or something that's good, but as a political system, they're a failure. They're failed states. They're police states. So, again, go read that Eric Blair article, Foiled FBI Terror Plots Curiously Quiet During Mass Shootings, up at Activist Post. And he has to point out that, yes, 150 foiled terror attacks since 9/11 were actually incubated by the FBI. For those keeping score, that's about one fake terror plot per month, every month since 9/11. He says, then one of the FBI orchestrated events went live with an attack known as the Boston Marathon bombing. And of course, that's exactly what it was. Let's see, I want to continue reading his article here. It says, who can forget shortly after the bombing, the Boston Marathon bombing? While the FBI remained silent, the internet exploding with open source researchers using images to investigate the bombing. The New York Post was even so bold to post false profiles of the alleged bombers. The wild speculation prompted the FBI to release the images of their chief suspects and ask in dramatic fashion for the public's help in identifying them, while simultaneously warning everyone away from sharing any unofficial information. We know the public will play a critical role in identifying and locating these individuals. Somebody out there knows these individuals, they pleaded. I'm actually going to continue to read this article on the other side. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We're going to continue talking about the mass shooters. We'll get into a brief commentary about Bergdahl, and then we'll move on to Ben Sass. We've got to discuss Ben Sass as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We'll be right back on the other side.
And Attorney General Eric Holder announced this week the creation of a new Justice Department task force entitled the Domestic Terrorism Executive Committee. Its mandate is to combat the threat of homegrown terrorists within the United States, citing the Boston Marathon bombings last year and the 2 shooting incidents at Fort Hood, Texas, as examples of the escalating danger of domestic terrorism. Holder has stated, as the nature of the threat we face evolves to include the possibility of individual radicalization via the internet, it is critical that we return our focus to potential extremists here at home. Holder also noted that the task force will focus on individuals within our borders motivated by anti-government sentiments and racial prejudice as well. Lee Rowland, a staff attorney at the ACLU, responded to Holder's statements by saying the Attorney General Holder's announcement that the new task force will focus on evidence of anti-government animus and racial intolerance raises concerns that it could be a sweeping mandate to monitor and collect controversial speech. The committee is a recreation of a task force created in 1995 by former Attorney General Janet Reno in the wake of the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. The original committee sparked concerns over its targeting of right-wing extremists. Well, it was disbanded after the attacks on 9/11 shifted the Justice Department's focus to overseas terrorist groups.
For more news, visit youtube.com/pigmind5.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm your host, Brandon Turbeville. Before the break, we were talking about Eric Blair of Activist Post and his article, FBI Terror Plots Curiously Quiet During Mass Shootings, and we were talking about the way in which these shootings most likely have been orchestrated from the intelligence community, the sort of shadow intelligence community, for some time during the rash of shootings that have been taking place over the last couple of years. But I was reading from Blair's article, so let me get back to that, and then we'll talk about this more. It said, yes, as it turned out, it was all a lie because the FBI did indeed already know these individuals, talking about the Zarnev brothers and so forth after the Boston Marathon bombing, since they recruited them 2 years before the Boston bombing. And the FBI often called on the Zarneva family prior to the attack, according to suspect's mother, who told RT, "They used to come to our home, they used to talk to me, they were telling me that he was really an extremist leader and that they were afraid of him," Zarneva said. But they didn't know who they were during that comic book-worthy press conference. Apparently the FBI also forgot to run facial recognition search on Facebook, too, before they asked the public to help identify them. Is it a conspiracy theory to call BS on this charade? It seems so, not to mention countless other dots that don't quite connect on that official story, but let's move forward. Does it seem odd to anyone else that since the Boston Marathon bombing, the number of foiled FBI terror plots has declined dramatically? In fact, I can only find one from this year when the FBI aided a desperate wannabe bank robber in a bombing plot, clearly not a terrorism case. One measly local non-story, down from practically one per month. The calm is odd for a number of reasons. The FBI recently changed their primary function from law enforcement to national security, aka protecting the United States from a terrorist attack, presumably to secure a seat on the war on terror gravy train. So you'd think they'd be more active in this arena. The silence and foiled terror attack seems even more deafening during the intense surge of lone wolf mass shootings lately. It also curiously occurs at the time when the DOJ's Domestic Terrorist Task Force was lying dormant, only to be rekindled now to confront domestic mass shooters. If staging bomb plots to keep the American people afraid to justify war on terror profiteering is the FBI's department, is it that far-fetched to believe similar forces are orchestrating mass shooting patsies to serve their agendas? It's naive to believe they aren't capable of plotting such things as clearly they've been proven to be. My guess is that incubating mass shooting patsies is the DHS's department, but that's just wild speculation on my part. It's true that tyrants will do anything to gain and maintain control. Add in the domestic military-industrial profits that explode in tandem with these terror events, and you start to wonder if our protectors are working for the Chancellor in V for Vendetta. The protectors constantly need to convince the public that we need them, but it seems they and they alone stand to gain from recent violence. They want us to need them to snoop our digital records, frisk us at all public locations, add us to watch lists, give up our guns, and lock us away indefinitely without charges or trial if we're suspected of having ties to terrorism. All to keep us safe. Such good protectors, right? And they conveniently label anyone who opposes these assaults on civil liberties as anti-government extremists who might influence these crazed mass shooters, almost scripted to perfection if you're a tyrant. We seem to be in a Be Afraid event cycle with this week's grand finale of hyped shootings with a See How We Keep You Safe cycle likely to be right around the corner. Now that the DOJ, FBI's Domestic Terrorism Task Force is back in action, I bet that there will be less live shootings and more foiled terror plots in the second half of 2014. Any takers? And the reason I wanted to, that's the end of the article, but please go pull it up. There's more in there, some videos and so forth too. But I really wanted to bring this article up because I think he hits the nail on the head, in that he's picked out the script, part of the script, and how it works. But also he's pointing out that it's been admitted that the FBI has over 150 terror plots that they've orchestrated and then busted. Right? That didn't exist, but they created them and then busted them. So what's to believe? why are we not to believe that they could have orchestrated these mass shootings? And I think that that's exactly what they've done. Maybe not the FBI specifically, maybe not even the DHS specifically, but someone in the shadow government apparatus has clearly orchestrated these shootings over the last few years. It's just too coincidental. We've got evidence on numerous occasions, whether it's Sandy Hook. There's plenty of evidence to show that Sandy Hook was indeed an inside job. The incessant propaganda against the Second Amendment. They are not going to stop on this, ladies and gentlemen. They are determined to pass all kinds of gun control laws, and it's going to be up to you to not obey those laws. Do not obey these laws. And it's unfortunately going to be up to you to resist them. However that confronts you, you're going to have to resist them. Because they're not going to stop on this propaganda blitz. And the American people, no matter how ill-informed you think they are, they're more ill-informed than that. And they're going to broadcast this propaganda on television, on radio, on the internet, day in and day out, and people are going to eat it up. People are going to eat it up. I recently saw part of an interview with Anderson Cooper and David Letterman. And this idiot, buck-tooth David Letterman says to Anderson Cooper, I was just in a store recently where they had handguns, rifles, and automatic weapons everywhere, and he was concerned about how people had so much access to a gun. Well, perhaps the big gap in David Letterman's teeth has affected his brain in some way. Because if he had been in a store where there was wall-to-wall automatic weapons, he probably should have alerted the FBI because those are illegal. This is something I've come across many times with the left-wing gun-grabbing crowd. They actually believe that you can get automatic weapons in the United States. You can go out and buy a machine gun that sprays people. But you can't. They're illegal. And this shows you the level of intelligence that these people have. They don't actually sit down and reason out a conclusion from the facts and draw their own opinions. They just take what they see on stupid Jon Stewart, whose brother is Goldman Sachs. Jon Stewart, of course, showing what he's worth recent weeks. The anti-vaccine crowd, I guess. They get their information from comedians, National Propaganda Radio, National Pentagon Radio, and MSNBC. They don't actually think about anything. So this is what you're going to have to deal with. Republicans, of course, don't do themselves any favor, or doesn't do the Second Amendment crowd any favors by screaming that they want the Second Amendment and at the same time wanting to slash government spending for anybody who may actually need some help in the middle of an economic depression, or freaking out over Islam and politicizing the gun issue. So with the Republicans in mind, I guess we should turn to the Bergdahl incident. A lot of controversy over private what is he, private? Anyway, so military soldier Bergdahl trading 5 Guantanamo detainees for Bergdahl, the last American held captive in Afghanistan. Well, it's funny that many of the people who are criticizing Obama on this issue, on the Bergdahl issue, let's think of what they're criticizing him for. Bergdahl was a traitor. Let's look at that first. Bergdahl is a traitor, a horrible traitor, because he walked away from his unit. Well, let's keep in mind, Bergdahl walked away from his unit because he was a soldier in Afghanistan who realized that they weren't actually over there to protect and defend democracy and freedom, that they weren't doing a good thing. They weren't defending America. They weren't liberating people. They were murdering them and slaughtering them. And he realized this, and he refused to take part in it anymore. So he walked away. So I say congratulations to Mr. Bergdahl. He's not a traitor, he's the hero. He wouldn't take part in killing anymore, and he walked away. Good for him, and I find it entirely hypocritical for people, those in the alternative media especially, who don't agree with the Afghan war, but then will criticize this man for refusing to take part in it. The argument that he caused military personnel to get killed because they were looking for him, I would say first, why were the military personnel looking for him if they knew he was a traitor? Because the punishment for being a traitor, of course, is death, so they must have been looking for him to kill him. Bergdahl walked away. Nobody told the military personnel to go out and look for him. Bergdahl didn't ask the military personnel to go out and look for him. It's not his responsibility. It's not his fault. So I would ask the alternative media outlets that are pushing this Bergdahl is a traitor lie to really take a step back and realize what you're arguing. Now this also bears on the fact that we have Obama trading Guantanamo detainees. Of course, this is the Guantanamo that Obama closed a year after he was president, right? Remember that, liberals? Remember that, white liberals, that Obama closed Guantanamo in 2009? I remember hearing that over and over and over in 2009, but it's still here. Still here. It's funny. He just released people from Guantanamo. Oh, well. Anyway. So we're also criticizing him for releasing Guantanamo detainees. My criticism is that he didn't release all of them immediately whenever he took office. Guantanamo never should have existed. I think, do we remember that most of the people in Guantanamo were actually sheep herders, farmers, and so forth, who just got captured by NATO in the West, United States? And of course, this argument that he negotiated with terrorists, he broke the law by negotiating with terrorists. Well, technically he did break a law because he didn't announce to Congress 30 days that he was going to release these Guantanamo detainees. That is technically a violation of the law. If you're going to release Guantanamo detainees, you have to give the Congress 30 days notice. That was something that was created in the last 13 years. A law that was passed in the last 13 years. Technicality. Negotiating with terrorists, however, is not a violation of the law. That's well within the prerogative of the president. We have a long-standing policy not to negotiate with terrorists. One could argue the merits of the negative aspects of that policy, but it's not a law. So you're going to criticize Obama for doing that. I wonder if you criticize the first American president to negotiate with terrorists, which was Ronald Reagan. Remember that? Iran-Contra? And we gave weapons for hostages? No doubt many of the people who criticize Obama for negotiating with terrorists are huge Reagan supporters, right? Ronald Reagan, who helped put up the Star Wars satellites that actually weren't used for military warfare. They were planning up the satellites to come look at you and control you. They were setting up the surveillance grid back in the 80s when they put these satellites up in space. But they told you it was for the Russians. But that's off topic too. Alright, we've got about 15 minutes left, so I think I'm going to move on to the Ben Sasse topic. We talked a little bit about Ben Sasse last week with my guest Dan Burdorf of the Tax Wall Street Party, and of course Dan is running on the Tax Wall Street Party ticket, third party. Nebraska Senate races, the voting comes up in November, and there's David Domina, who's the Democrat. Democrats in Nebraska don't stand a chance, so David Domina is not likely to do well at all, maybe 20% of the vote. I don't know, whatever. He's not going to win. The Republican candidate is Ben Sasse, and of course Dan Burdorf, Tax Wall Street Party candidate. Dan's a good candidate. I had Dan on my show last week, and you should go back and listen to the archive of that and listen to his platform. He espouses all of the right economic platforms, which is 1% Wall Street sales tax, nationalizing the Federal Reserve, parity agriculture, Medicare for all, that's universal health care, but with no individual mandate. Dan's also pro-Second Amendment, so he's anti-free trade, all that kind of stuff. So good for Dan, and I wish him the best of luck. And again, go listen to that interview that we did last week, and also go visit his webpage, danfornebraska.com. But again, the Republican candidate, the favorite, is Ben Sasse. And the reason that I've talked about Ben Sasse so much is because back in 2006, 2007, 2008, we started to see the political dawning of Barack Obama, the political rise of Barack Obama. And it was clear that Obama, toward the latter part of 2008, was being set up for a run for the presidency. Of course, Barack Obama was inexperienced by most standards, right? He was a state senator, then he was a U.S. senator, and then he went on to be the president. It's pretty meteoric rise. And of course, I should also point out that the most historically corrupt cities, one of the most historically corrupt cities in the United States, Chicago, is an area where Barack Obama thrived. So what does that tell you? But we're seeing the same situation now with Ben Sasse. He's a Republican favorite out of Nebraska. The Tea Party loves him because he uses Tea Party rhetoric. But the business Republicans love him too because he embodies that aspect of Republicanism as well. And it looks like Ben Sasse is being groomed for a presidential run. Now, this is not set in stone, but it's very, very plausible to believe this. The candidates that I've mentioned are going to be running for a seat that was vacated by former Republican Mike Johans. So this is an open seat. Dan is a third party with very, very limited funds. David Domina is a Democrat, not going to win. The Democratic Party in Nebraska kind of functions as a third party. But Ben Sasse is almost assured the U.S. Senate seat in Nebraska. Okay, so this gives him, if he's going to run in 2016, this gives him about a year in the U.S. Senate. And if you're in the U.S. Senate, and this is how you're going to rise to power, what you do is you get into the Senate, and you, within 6 months or so, you announce your intentions to run for the presidency. You don't vote. You go in, you vote present. Right? You don't go vote for or against things, because as soon as you vote, that creates a record. And when you have a record, you immediately alienate people. For instance, if you go into the Senate and you vote for guns, then you alienate the anti-gun crowd. If you vote against guns, you alienate the pro-gun crowd. But if you vote present, then you don't really piss anybody off. So you go in there and you do this for about 6 months. The average American has an IQ of about a 5-year-old when it comes to politics. So, well, you know what, probably less without the intuitiveness. So when he announces his political campaign for the presidency, it's not likely that most people will even really register the fact that he's only been a senator for 6 months. But then you have the next 2 years, the campaign for the presidency and so forth. Sasse is young, he's charismatic and so forth, so somebody to watch. But let's talk about him. And Wayne Madsen has done some reporting about Sasse, so has Webster Tarpley and a few other people. But it's, again, important to look at. In my article, Ben Sasse, The Insider Denier, you can find at BrandonTurbeville.com and also theantimedia.org. Now, some of the things, let's look at Sasse's past, right? Sasse was formerly employed by McKinsey & Company, which is a global management consulting firm. It employed Chelsea Clinton at one time and had serves as an advisor to governments, to private businesses, to many other things, and it boasts about producing more CEOs than any other company. SAS also worked with the Boston Consulting Group, which is another global management firm, considered one of the big three. BCG advises 2/3 of the Fortune 500 list. So 2/3 of those people are advised by BCG. Many people might remember BCG employed Mitt Romney. And it was at Boston Consulting Group where Romney met his friend Benjamin Netanyahu, and where they met and developed what they call a long-lasting connection and friendship. So it's definitely a place where certain aspects of society can mingle, meet. SAS in 2009, as Obama was solidifying his first year in office, SAS assumed a position as president of Midland University in Nebraska. That made him one of the youngest presidents of any American university. He was 37. This is what's interesting now. During his tenure at the university, SAS was responsible for hiring Mr. Jason Dannelly as athletics director. Dannelly went on to face charges for terroristic threats, pandering, and solicitation of prostitution because he threatened an 18-year-old college student with physical violence and death, if I'm not mistaken, if she refused to have sex with him. He had a separate charge. He was accused of attempting to pay a 20-year-old college student $300 to have sex with him. Now, those are his private sector jobs. His government jobs, they're actually more interesting than that, and they're also tainted with controversy. Now, SAS paints himself as the outsider. I'm not a part of Washington. I'm an outsider. Well, this is why I call him the insider denier, right? Because he's denying that he was on the inside, and clearly he was on the inside. From 1996 to 1998, 2 years, SAS worked as a tutor and a proctor with the U.S. House of Representatives Page program. And I think some of you automatically know where I'm going to go with this. And at that job, his responsibilities entailed procuring the safety and welfare of the pages who were enrolled in the program. So it was to make sure that they got their academic work done, that they weren't flunking out, that they were going to and from the jobs as they were supposed to, and that they were, in their dorms at night and so forth. General academic progress and their personal safety was his responsibility. Now, it was during this period that much of the sexual molestation of the congressional pages took place. Remember the Representative Mark Foley and Jim Colba, or Colby, however you say it. I think it's Colba. They were implicated in the scandal. Foley resigned in 2006, but Colby was cleared. Colba was cleared. But of course, there's plenty of evidence to show that the congressional page scandal is not simply a few perverted representatives, and that actually goes a lot further than that, and it kind of goes through the halls of government, banking, business, and other institutions, secret societies, and so forth, as pedophilia generally does. So it's quite interesting that we have Ben Sasse, who has at least 2 sexual molestation scandals in his very short career. But some more interesting things about Sasse. Sasse worked for the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Policy during 2003 to 2005. Now, these were critical years for the country as a whole and the Department of Justice as an office, because it was during this time that the torture memos were written by the Department of Justice and the Attorney General's office. So Wayne Madsen, of the Wayne Madsen report, actually goes so far as to say that it's inconceivable, this is Madsen's quote, it is inconceivable that Sasse did not have direct input on the policy that concluded that detainees of the U.S. government, including U.S. citizens, could be subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques or simply torture. Madsen also says that Sasse was instrumental in coordinating the torture policy with John Yoo, who was the Deputy Assistant U.S. Attorney General in the Office of Legal Counsel. So definitely involved in the torture memos as well. Now, there was also an article by Dina Winter, who wrote for the Nebraska Watchdog. And she says that SAS was not only involved in crafting torture policies, but also in intelligence sharing between the FBI and CIA. Now, we don't actually know very much about his exact duties in this regard, but it appears that he's working as a liaison between the FBI and CIA. Now, this is a pretty important job. This is an intelligence and security sensitive job for someone who's so young and so much of an outsider. So we have a brief tenure after this job with the Department of Homeland Security, where he moved on from 2007 to 2009, where he was a principal advisor to the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, as well as a principal advisor to Secretary Michael Leavitt and Chief of Staff for Nebraska Representative Jeff Fortenberry. So, very interesting career here. Also look at Ben Sass's political contributions for the 2014 Senate campaign. A lot of it comes from Club for Growth. A lot of it comes from the Senate Conservatives Fund. Of course, the Club for Growth is funded by it's a major neocon, pro-austerity, Koch brothers, anti-union, reactionary outfit, and of course the Senate Conservatives Fund is as well. So there's lots of money going into Sass's campaign from these organizations. So lots of money coming in from Freedom Works, which is sort of the Zionist reactionary warmonger organization. Lots of big corporate funding as well. Sass is what you would call a consensus candidate because he's able to kind of be everything to everybody in the Republican system, right? He presents himself as being, just another guy, just another blue collar worker, when actually it's not much further from the truth, right? He promotes himself as an outsider as opposed to people like Mitt Romney or Mitch McConnell. He also promotes himself as an intellectual at the same time, which is to the opposite of people like Chris Christie. So he appeals to the Tea Party, the regular guy image, but he also appeals to the intellectual crowds and the neocon crowds as well. So this guy really does pose potential threat. We've got commenters and so forth who've come out and said that they went to high school with Ben Sass, they went to college with Ben Sass, and he introduced himself as the 45th president, which would be the president in 2016, and that he's always shown a clear penchant for the idea that he would be the 45th president. So it's something to watch, and we'll talk more about this next week, and we're going to tackle a number of other topics in the coming weeks, whether it's Syria, Ukraine, whether it's the gun issue and the shooters issue. Always, or I should say never, a lack of topics in this line of work. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
'For more news, visit youtube.com/pigmine5.